The morning sky over the Rhine River Valley turned dark at 11:43 on March 23, 1945, not from clouds, but from aircraft. General-Lieutenant Dietrich von Choltitz stood in the remains of a command post near Remagen and watched what he would later describe in his memoir as the end of all illusion, wave after wave of republic. P-47 Thunderbolts crossed overhead, their distinctive razorback silhouettes blotting out patches of spring sunlight. They came in formations so vast that junior officers stopped counting at 300. But they kept coming. For 47 minutes, the sound of Pratt & Whitney R-2800 engines filled the valley like sustained thunder. Von Choltitz had commanded panzer divisions in France. He had witnessed the Wehrmacht at its apex. But nothing in his career had prepared him for this moment, when the fundamental mathematics of industrial war became undeniable, written across the sky in American aluminum. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The story of what German High Command said when they confronted America's aerial armada is not simply about fighter planes. It is about the precise moment when belief systems, carefully constructed through years of Nazi propaganda about German technical superiority and American industrial weakness, collided with material reality so overwhelming that even the most ideologically committed officers could no longer maintain their delusions. This is the story of that collision. To understand the shock experienced by German commanders in 1945, we must first understand what they believed about American air power in 1942 and early 1943. German military intelligence, the Abwehr, had been tracking American aircraft production since before Pearl Harbor. Their reports acknowledged American industrial capacity, but consistently emphasized what they viewed as critical American weaknesses. American aircraft, according to Luftwaffe technical assessments circulated in 1942, were adequate in number, but inferior in design. The prevailing view within the Oberkommando der Luftwaffe held that American pilots lacked the combat experience of their German counterparts, and that American fighters, while rugged, could not match the performance characteristics of German designs like the Messerschmitt Bf 109 or the Focke-Wulf W190. This assessment was not entirely fantasy. Early American fighters deployed to Europe, particularly the Bell P-39 Airacobra and the Curtiss P-40 Warhawk, did indeed suffer performance limitations at higher altitudes where Luftwaffe fighters excelled. German fighter pilots in 1942 achieved impressive kill ratios against these earlier American types. These early encounters reinforced German confidence. Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring, commander of the Luftwaffe, told his staff in October 1942 that while American numbers might eventually pose challenges, German technical superiority and pilot quality would offset any quantitative disadvantage. The P-47 Thunderbolt first entered combat over Europe in April 1943. At that time, the German High Command viewed it as another American attempt to field a heavy fighter, interesting but not revolutionary. Intelligence reports noted its size, its substantial weight of nearly 7 tons when fully loaded, and its radial engine, which German engineers considered less efficient than inline designs. Initial Luftwaffe encounters with the Thunderbolt confirmed what German pilots expected. It was a sturdy aircraft, difficult to shoot down, but not particularly maneuverable in close combat. Luftwaffe ace pilots reported that the P-47 could be outturned by the Bf 109 and the Fa 190 in traditional dogfighting. What German intelligence failed to grasp in those early months was not the quality of the individual P-47, but the sheer scale of what was coming. Republic Aviation had designed the Thunderbolt for mass production. Every component, every assembly process, had been engineered for rapid manufacture. While German aircraft production in 1943 relied heavily on skilled craftsmen and complex assembly procedures, Republic's factories in Farmingdale, New York, and Evansville, Indiana, operated on principles borrowed from automotive mass production. By the end of 1943, Republic was producing more than 400 Thunderbolts per month. By mid-1944, production exceeded 700 aircraft monthly. The numbers themselves tell a story that German planners either could not or would not believe. In 1943, Germany produced approximately 25,000 aircraft of all types. This seemed like a substantial figure to Luftwaffe logistics officers. The United States, in that same year, produced 96,000 aircraft. Of these, Republic built over 3,300 P-47 Thunderbolts in 1943 alone. In 1944, American aircraft production reached its wartime peak, 96,318 aircraft. Republic's contribution that year was 9,700 Thunderbolts. By war's end, Republic had manufactured 15,663 P-47 Thunderbolts. But numbers on intelligence reports remained abstract to frontline German commanders until those numbers manifested in the sky above them. The psychological transformation came in stages, beginning in late 1943 and reaching crisis proportions in the spring and summer of 1944. The first cracks in German confidence appeared during Big Week, the concentrated Allied bombing campaign against German aircraft production facilities in February 1944. From February 20th to 25th, the 8th Air Force and RAF Bomber Command launched coordinated strikes against aircraft factories, ball-bearing plants, and related industrial targets. P-47 Thunderbolts flew escort missions for the heavy bomber streams, and for the first time, German fighter controllers encountered what they described as continuous fighter presence over German airspace. Luftwaffe units scrambled to intercept American bomber formations, only to find themselves immediately engaged by Thunderbolt escorts. When German fighters broke off to rearm and refuel, fresh P-47 formations arrived. The continuous rotation of American fighter coverage was something Luftwaffe tactical doctrine had not anticipated. General Major Adolf Galland, at that time the general of the fighter arm, received reports from squadron commanders describing what seemed impossible: American fighters maintaining standing patrols over German territory. Galland's own combat experience told him this defied the basic mathematics of fighter operations. Aircraft had limited fuel, pilots had limited endurance. Maintaining continuous coverage required depth of numbers that shouldn't exist. Yet the reports kept coming. Jagdgeschwader. 3 reported continuous fighter contact over Brunswick. Jagdgeschwader 11 encountered what they estimated as 200 P-47s over Oschersleben. These were not exaggerations born of combat stress. 8th Air Force records confirm that on February 22nd alone, 668 P-47s flew escort missions. The Thunderbolt's combat radius had been extended through the addition of external drop tanks. AP-47D model, the variant that dominated production from mid-1944 onward, could carry 2 150-gallon drop tanks, extending its combat radius to approximately 450 miles. This meant that Thunderbolts based in England could escort bombers deep into Germany, something German planning had considered impossible for heavy escort fighters. When Galland presented these facts to Goering in March 1944, the Reichsmarschall reportedly responded with skepticism, suggesting that Galland's pilots were overestimating enemy numbers due to combat fatigue. But the evidence continued to accumulate. Luftwaffe ground observers, who had no stake in exaggerating enemy fighter strength, filed reports confirming the massive scale of American fighter operations. Railway officials reported that train movements during daylight hours had become nearly impossible due to constant strafing attacks by American fighters. Wehrmacht supply officers complained that daylight road movement attracted immediate air attack. The P-47, equipped with 8 50-caliber machine guns and capable of carrying bombs or rockets on external hardpoints, had evolved from a pure fighter into a devastating ground attack aircraft. The psychological impact on German ground forces became severe during the spring of 1944. Wehrmacht soldiers who had served on the Eastern Front, where Luftwaffe support, though diminished, still occasionally appeared, found the Western Front a fundamentally different environment. Private Hans Becker, serving with the 352nd Infantry Division in Normandy, wrote in a letter intercepted by Allied intelligence that soldiers had learned to recognize the sound of the R2-800 engine from miles away and would immediately seek cover. The sound had become associated with inevitable destruction. Becker noted that younger soldiers, those conscripted in 1943 and 1944, had never experienced German air superiority and simply accepted constant Allied air dominance as the normal condition of warfare. This psychological normalization of Allied air superiority among common soldiers contrasted sharply with the denial still present in some quarters of the High Command. The cognitive dissonance reached its peak during the preparations for Operation Overlord, the Allied invasion of Normandy. In early June 1944, Luftwaffe intelligence estimated that the Allies could potentially deploy approximately 1,500 fighters to support invasion operations. This estimate, though higher than earlier projections, still fell dramatically short of reality. On D-Day, June 6, 1944, the Allied air forces flew over 14,000 sorties. Of these, approximately 4,000 were flown by P-47 Thunderbolts, operating from bases in England. General Feldmarschall Erwin Rommel, commanding Army Group B defending northern France, had spent months before the invasion requesting additional Luftwaffe support. His requests went largely unfulfilled. On June 4th, 2 days before the invasion, Luftwaffe forces in Western Europe could muster approximately 319 operational fighter aircraft. Against this force, the Allies deployed over 5,000 fighters, including 13 P-47 groups from the 8th and 9th Air Forces. The disparity was not merely quantitative. German fighters, operating from bases increasingly damaged by Allied bombing, suffering from chronic fuel shortages, and manned by pilots with decreasing training time, faced American units that had achieved complete tactical maturity. By mid-1944, average American fighter pilots arrived in Europe with over 300 hours of flight training. Many Luftwaffe replacement pilots in the same period arrived at frontline units with fewer than 160 hours total flight time, and sometimes as little as 112 hours. On the morning of June 6th, German forces along the Normandy coast watched the sky fill with Allied aircraft. Oberstleutnant Josef Priller and his wingman, Feldwebel Heinz Wodachik, were the only two Luftwaffe fighters to attack the invasion beaches on D-Day itself. They made a single strafing pass over Sword Beach before being forced to withdraw in the face of overwhelming Allied fighter cover. Priller's report to his superiors was brief and factual. Luftwaffe intervention over the invasion beaches was impossible, given current force ratios. The weeks following D-Day forced a brutal education upon German commanders who still harbored illusions about controlling Western European airspace. During the Battle of Normandy, from June 6 to August 25, 1944, the Allied air forces flew over 480,000 sorties. The Luftwaffe, by comparison, managed approximately 32,000 sorties during the same period, and many of these were flown at night or in weather conditions that grounded Allied aircraft. The ratio of 15-1 represented more than numerical superiority. It represented the complete collapse of German defensive capabilities in the air. General der Panzertruppe Leo Geyer von Schweppenberg, commanding Panzer Group West, experienced this collapse firsthand on June 10, 1944. His headquarters, located in the Château de la Caine near Caen, had been identified by Allied intelligence through ultra-intercepts. At approximately 2100 hours, rocket-firing Hawker Typhoons attacked the chateau, followed by medium bombers. The headquarters was destroyed. 17 staff officers were killed. Von Schweppenberg himself survived, but his command structure was shattered. In his report filed 2 days later, von Schweppenberg stated bluntly that armoured operations, under conditions of total Allied air supremacy, had become technically impossible. He noted that during daylight hours, any movement by vehicles larger than motorcycles attracted immediate air attack, usually within 15 to 20 minutes of being spotted. This 15 to 20-minute window between observation and attack reflected the sophisticated coordination Allied air forces had achieved by mid-1944. Fighter bombers like the P-47 operated in what the 9th Air Force called armed reconnaissance missions. Flights of 4 to 8 Thunderbolts would patrol assigned sectors of the front, responding to calls from ground controllers or attacking targets of opportunity. Each P-47 could carry 2,000 pounds of bombs in addition to its machine guns, making it as capable as many dedicated light bombers while retaining full fighter performance. The material abundance this represented overwhelmed German comprehension. Luftwaffe logistics officers, accustomed to calculating mission capabilities based on scarce aviation fuel and limited ammunition supplies, could not fathom an air force that flew multiple sorties per aircraft per day. Every day, regardless of weather or tactical necessity, American maintenance crews could turn around a P-47 from landing to next takeoff in under 45 minutes when required. German maintenance crews in 1944, working with fewer trained personnel, less adequate tools, and increasingly damaged facilities, typically required several hours to prepare an aircraft for its next mission, assuming parts and fuel were available. The ammunition disparity told its own story. A single P-47 carried approximately 3,400 rounds of 50 caliber ammunition for its 8 machine guns. American supply chains ensured that this ammunition was available in effectively unlimited quantities at forward airfields. German fighters in 1944 increasingly faced ammunition rationing. Luftwaffe pilots reported being issued as few as 60 rounds per gun for some missions, forcing them to hold fire until point-blank range, a tactical disadvantage that often proved fatal. By August 1944, the psychological break was complete among front-line German commanders in the West. After the Allied breakout from Normandy and the encirclement of German forces in the Falaise pocket, surviving Wehrmacht officers filed reports that read less like military assessments and more like testimonies of trauma. Oberst Rudolf Christoph von Gersdorf, Chief of Staff for the 7th Army, described the Falaise pocket as a killing ground, where Allied fighter bombers, predominantly P-47s and Typhoons, attacked German columns continuously from dawn until dusk. Von Gersdorf estimated that his army lost approximately 80% of its heavy equipment to air attack during the withdrawal attempt. Vehicles that could not move due to damage or lack of fuel were systematically destroyed from the air. Those that attempted movement during daylight were attacked within minutes. The reports reaching Berlin from the Western Front in August and September 1944 could no longer be dismissed as exaggerations or defeatism. Too many senior officers, too many separate units, reported the same experiences. Allied air supremacy was not temporary. It was not limited to specific sectors. It was absolute, total, and unbreakable with available German resources. Adolf Galland, by then deeply frustrated with Goering's refusal to acknowledge reality, compiled a comprehensive report in September 1944, documenting the Luftwaffe's numerical and qualitative decline. The report included specific data on Allied fighter production, pilot training systems, and operational capabilities. Galland's report noted that the United States was producing more fighter pilots per month than Germany had combat-ready fighter pilots in total. The report estimated, accurately, that the Allied air forces in Europe operated approximately 8,000 fighters, of which at least 2,000 were P-47s. Against this force, the Luftwaffe could field approximately 1,500 operational fighters on the Western Front, and many of these were committed to defending Germany itself against strategic bombing rather than supporting ground forces. Goering's response to Galland's report was characteristic of the denial that had overtaken portions of the Nazi leadership. He accused Galland of defeatism and questioned whether Luftwaffe pilots were fighting with sufficient determination. This accusation, coming from a commander who had not flown combat missions himself since 1940, destroyed what remained of Galland's professional respect for his superior. In his post-war memoir, Galland recalled that by late 1944, serious discussions about air combat capabilities had become impossible with Goering, who preferred comforting delusions to operational reality. But reality could not be denied at the operational level. By autumn 1944, Wehrmacht tactical doctrine had adapted to assume zero German air support and continuous Allied air interdiction. Infantry and armour commanders planned movements exclusively for hours of darkness or heavy weather. Supply operations shifted almost entirely to night. Even then, Allied night fighters, equipped with increasingly sophisticated radar systems, made night movement hazardous. The material cost of this air supremacy on German military effectiveness cannot be overstated. Modern analysis of Wehrmacht logistics during the 1944 campaigns in the West suggests that Allied air interdiction reduced German supply efficiency by approximately 60 to 70%. Supplies that did reach frontline units arrived in quantities insufficient for sustained operations. Artillery units rationed shells. Panzer units operated with partially filled fuel tanks, limiting their tactical mobility. Infantry divisions received irregular food deliveries, forcing soldiers to supplement rations through foraging, which further reduced combat effectiveness. The psychological cost was equally severe. Soldiers who spend months under constant air attack without friendly air cover develop a profound sense of helplessness. German military psychologists in 1944 reported increasing rates of what they termed flight neurosis among both new recruits and veteran soldiers. The symptoms included obsessive scanning of the sky, inability to sleep during daylight hours, and panic reactions to aircraft engine sounds. Some soldiers refused to leave covered positions, even when ordered. Officers reported that maintaining offensive momentum under air attack required extraordinary leadership because soldiers' natural instinct was to seek cover and remain there. The breaking point for many German commanders came not in France but in Germany itself during the final months of the war. As Allied forces crossed the Rhine and advanced into the German heartland in March and April 1945, the Luftwaffe made final attempts to contest Allied air superiority. The results were catastrophic. The Luftwaffe lost approximately 2,000 aircraft in air combat during March 1945 alone. By comparison, Allied air losses for the same month totaled approximately 300 aircraft from all causes, including accidents and anti-aircraft fire. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The scene that opens this story, General Lieutenant von Koltitz watching the sky darken with P-47s over the Rhine, represents a specific moment in the final collapse. By late March 1945, the 9th Air Force's P-47 groups had achieved a level of operational dominance that allowed them to fly what amounted to demonstration missions. Massive formations would sweep over remaining German positions, not necessarily to attack specific targets, but to demonstrate that they could operate with complete impunity. The psychological impact on German soldiers and commanders was crushing. These were not desperate battles. These were exhibitions of power so overwhelming that resistance seemed not merely futile but absurd. Von Choltitz's memoir, published in 1951, includes his reflection on that morning in March. He wrote that as he watched the aircraft pass overhead, he calculated in his mind what those formations represented in terms of fuel, ammunition, spare parts, trained pilots, and maintenance crews. The calculation led him to a conclusion he had resisted for years. Germany had not lost the war through lack of courage or determination. Germany had lost because the nation had challenged industrial powers capable of producing war materials at scales that simply had no historical precedent. The United States alone had manufactured over 96,000 military aircraft in 1944. Germany, in its peak production year of 1944, manufactured 39,800 military aircraft. The ratio of roughly 2.5 to 1 multiplied across every category of war production: tanks, trucks, artillery, ammunition. Ships meant that Germany never had a realistic chance of victory once the American industrial base fully mobilized. This realization, coming to various German commanders at various times during 1944 and 1945, carried a bitter irony. Many of these officers had spent years believing Nazi propaganda about the superiority of German engineering, the alleged softness of American society, and the impossibility of American mass production matching German quality. They had been taught that Americans, with their emphasis on comfort and consumer goods, lacked the martial spirit necessary for sustained warfare. They had been assured that while America might produce quantity, Germany's focus on quality would prove decisive. The P-47 Thunderbolt demolished these assumptions. It was both quantity and quality. It was produced in numbers that made German production look artisanal, yet it was a superb combat aircraft. Its R-2800 engine, built by Pratt & Whitney, was manufactured with precision matching any German engineering. The engine's reliability in combat conditions exceeded that of many German power plants. American pilots, trained through a systematic program that emphasized flight hours over ideological indoctrination, proved as skilled as their German counterparts, and generally better prepared for the specific demands of long-range escort and ground attack missions. German engineering officers who examined captured P-47s filed detailed reports noting the aircraft's thoughtful design features. The Thunderbolt's rugged construction, its redundant flight control systems, its ability to absorb battle damage and continue flying, these were not accidents, but the result of careful engineering focused on operational effectiveness rather than theoretical performance. Republic's designers had prioritized pilot survival, combat reliability, and ease of maintenance over achieving maximum speed or ceiling. The result was an aircraft that, while not exceptional in any single performance category, excelled at the actual work of air combat in the European theatre. The contrast with German fighter development was stark. By 1944, the Luftwaffe was introducing increasingly sophisticated aircraft like the Messerschmitt Me-262 jet fighter. On paper, the Me-262's performance specifications exceeded those of any Allied fighter. In practice, the aircraft's complexity, fragile engines, and demanding maintenance requirements meant that it had minimal operational impact. Germany produced approximately 1,400 Me-262s, but never fielded more than approximately 200 operational aircraft at any one time. Engine reliability issues meant that many jets were grounded awaiting repairs or replacement engines that never arrived due to Allied bombing of production facilities. This pattern repeated across German weapons development in the war's final years. The Luftwaffe pursued sophisticated designs requiring materials, manufacturing capacity, and fuel supplies that Germany no longer possessed. Meanwhile, the Americans continued building P-47s by the thousands, each aircraft built to proven specifications using materials available in abundance. German innovation, without adequate industrial support, proved inferior to American standardization backed by overwhelming production capacity. The recognition of this reality by German commanders came too late and accomplished nothing except to add intellectual comprehension to the physical defeat already underway. By April 1945, as Soviet forces closed on Berlin from the east and American and British forces advanced from the west, the Luftwaffe had effectively ceased to exist as a coherent fighting force. Individual units still flew combat missions, some with desperate courage, but these scattered efforts had no impact on the war's outcome. Oberst Johannes Steinhoff, a Luftwaffe fighter ace who survived the war, later wrote about flying one of the final missions in a Me-262 in April 1945. He described attacking a formation of American bombers escorted by P-47s, achieving one bomber kill before being forced to break off due to fuel shortage. As he flew back toward his base, he counted more than 60 Allied fighters in the sky around him, not a single German aircraft. The mathematical absurdity of the situation, one German jet against 60 Allied fighters, encapsulated the entire strategic situation. German technology, German courage, German tactical skill. None of it mattered against such overwhelming material superiority. The final weeks of the European war saw German fighter pilots flying knowing their missions were meaningless. They fought not to change the war's outcome but to maintain personal honor, to protect retreating ground forces for a few more hours, or simply because their orders demanded it. Some, particularly younger pilots who had known nothing but defeat, flew with a fatalism that bordered on suicidal. Others quietly refused, recognizing that dying in a hopeless battle served no purpose. When Germany surrendered on May 8, 1945, the Luftwaffe possessed on paper approximately 3,000 aircraft. Approximately 1,000 of these were combat-capable fighters. Many lacked fuel for more than a single mission. Spare parts for repairs had ceased arriving weeks earlier. Trained pilots who survived combat increasingly had nowhere to land, as Allied advances overran Luftwaffe bases. The organization that had terrorized European skies in 1940 and 1941 had been systematically destroyed, not through any single catastrophic defeat, but through accumulated losses that Germany's industrial base could not replace. The United States Army Air Forces in Europe, by contrast, could at any moment put more than 3,000 heavy bombers into the air, escorted by 2,000 fighters, knowing that losses would be replaced within days and damaged aircraft repaired overnight. The maintenance and supply infrastructure supporting this capability represented an industrial achievement without historical parallel. American supply chains delivered engines, propellers, ammunition, bombs, fuel, spare parts, and every other necessary material to bases across England and liberated Europe in quantities that allowed continuous operations regardless of combat losses or mechanical failures. Adolf Galland, reflecting on the air war in his post-war interrogation by Allied intelligence officers, made a striking admission. He stated that by late 1943, he personally had concluded that Germany could not win the air war. The mathematics of aircraft production made Allied victory inevitable, but he could not say this to Goering or to Hitler without being accused of defeatism or cowardice. So, he continued commanding, continued planning operations, continued sending young pilots into combat, knowing that the struggle was hopeless. Galland's testimony reveals the profound dysfunction at the heart of Nazi military leadership. Truth became impossible to speak when it contradicted ideological requirements. Other German commanders reached similar conclusions at different times. General Feldmarschall Albert Kesselring, commanding German forces in Italy, recognized by early 1944 that Allied air power made conventional defensive operations impossible. His tactical adaptations, extensive use of camouflage, movement only at night, dispersion of forces to minimize damage from air attack bought time but could not prevent defeat. Kesselring's private correspondence, seized after the war, revealed his growing despair at the Luftwaffe's impotence. In one letter to a fellow officer from June 1944, Kesselring wrote that he felt like a chess player who had lost his queen and both rooks, but was still expected to checkmate an opponent who continued to add pieces to the board. The systematic destruction of German air power had consequences beyond direct military effects. German civilians, who had been promised by Nazi propaganda that the Luftwaffe would protect the fatherland, watched American bombers pass overhead in formations of hundreds, with little to no German fighter opposition. The psychological impact of this visual evidence of defeat eroded civilian morale perhaps more effectively than the bombing itself. Citizens who had believed in German technical superiority, who had trusted in the Luftwaffe's ability to shield them, now understood that their government had either lied or been profoundly incompetent. German soldiers captured in the war's final months, when interrogated by Allied intelligence, frequently mentioned air power as the single most demoralizing factor they had faced. Many expressed not anger but a kind of exhausted resignation. They had fought as hard as they could. They had used the weapons provided to them. None of it had mattered because the enemy possessed resources so vast that local tactical victories meant nothing. Some captured soldiers asked their interrogators almost academically how America had built so many aircraft so quickly. The question reflected genuine incomprehension of the industrial system that had produced their defeat. The answer, which few German soldiers or officers fully grasped, lay in decisions made years before the war. American industry had developed mass production techniques for civilian markets, particularly automobiles, that could be rapidly adapted to military production. Factories that built cars could build aircraft. Workers trained to assemble vehicles could assemble bombers. The tool and die makers, the supply chain managers, the logistics experts who supported American consumer production all transitioned to supporting military production. Germany, with its more limited industrial base and emphasis on craft production, could not replicate this transformation at comparable scale. Republic Aviation's factory in Farmingdale operated using assembly line techniques that Henry Ford would have recognized. Components moved along moving conveyor systems. Workers specialized in specific tasks repeated hundreds of times. Quality control occurred at multiple checkpoints. The process was efficient, scalable, and relentless. At peak production, Republic completed one P-47 every 63 minutes. German fighter production, even at its wartime peak, never achieved comparable efficiency. Messerschmitt and Focke-Wulf produced excellent aircraft but in numbers insufficient to replace losses. The strategic implications became clear only in retrospect. Germany needed to win the war quickly, before American industrial mobilization reached full capacity. The failure to defeat Britain in 1940, the decision to invade the Soviet Union in 1941, and the declaration of war on the United States in December 1941, these strategic errors created a situation where Germany faced enemies with combined industrial capacity many times greater than its own. Once that capacity mobilized, German defeat became inevitable regardless of battlefield courage or tactical skill. The P-47 Thunderbolt, massed in formations that darkened the sky, represented the physical manifestation of this strategic reality. Each aircraft testified to American industrial capacity. Each pilot demonstrated American training infrastructure. Each mission proved American logistical capability. Together, they formed an argument that no amount of Nazi propaganda could refute. The argument was simple. Germany had challenged powers capable of building war machines faster than Germany could destroy them. Mathematics does not negotiate. Numbers do not care about ideology. The side that can replace losses while inflicting irreplaceable losses on its opponent will win. By 1945, German commanders understood this. Many had understood it for months or years. But understanding came too late to change outcomes. In the final accounting, the United States produced 15,663 P-47 Thunderbolts during the war. Germany shot down approximately 3,000 P-47s in combat, a testament to German fighter pilots' skill and determination. But for every P-47 destroyed, 5 more rolled off American production lines. German aircraft production, hampered by Allied bombing, resource shortages, and inefficient manufacturing processes, could not match this replacement rate. The Luftwaffe lost approximately 70,000 aircraft, destroyed or damaged beyond repair during the war. German industry, even at peak capacity, produced approximately 119,000 aircraft total from 1939 through 1945. The attrition rate could not be sustained. The human cost of this mathematical inevitability was staggering. Approximately 137,000 Luftwaffe personnel died during the war. American air forces lost approximately 100,000 personnel in all theaters. Both sides paid in blood for the technological and industrial clash playing out in the skies over Europe. But one side could replace its losses while the other could not. By war's end, the American training pipeline continued, producing pilots, navigators, bombardiers, and gunners by the thousands. German training programs had collapsed. Fuel shortages meant that German pilot candidates in early 1945 sometimes received less than 30 hours of flight training before being sent to operational units, where they typically survived only a few missions before being killed or captured. This degradation of German pilot quality created a vicious cycle. Inexperienced pilots died quickly, removing any opportunity for them to gain experience. The few remaining veteran pilots carried impossible burdens, often flying multiple missions per day in desperate attempts to protect ground forces. These veterans, exhausted and overwhelmed, gradually fell to attrition. By war's end, the Luftwaffe had been reduced to a handful of elite units with experienced pilots and many understrength units manned by teenagers with minimal training. Against them flew Allied air forces at peak efficiency, with pilots rotating through combat tours to prevent exhaustion and maintain skill levels. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.